Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome to a bit of a lore discussion video along the lines of the God Emperor has changed a lot video I did a little while ago. Because, as most of you have probably noticed, GW has reintroduced the squats in the form of the League of Votann. And, you know, there are parts of it that I quite like, and there are parts of it I really don't like. So let's have a bit of a wider discussion on it, and I invite all of you, of course, to give me your thoughts and feedbacks in the comments section down below, as we're going to talk about the lore that we know is emerging for the League of Votann, like, for example, what a Votann is, which is one of GW's better ideas in recent memory, honestly, and what the squats were, where they came from, and how their reimagining hits certain notes and yet misses others. If you want to know more about the squats specifically, by the way, I did do a video on them some 3 years ago. It's been a while, but it should contain most of the basic information. And fittingly, as the squats were originally wiped out by the ever-evolving growing space cancer that is the Tyranids, we have a sponsorship from Manscaped, raising awareness of a far more immediately pressing form of cancer. In case the t-shirt didn't give it away plainly enough, today we're going to talk about testicular cancer, the prevention of which is of course a subject near and dear to Manscaped's heart, as they are the finest purveyor of quality goods with which you can use to clear your underbrush, including, of course, the Lawnmower 4.0, and now, ideally suited for today's topic, ball wipes. I do love this company. But testicular cancer is no joke. It is the leading form of cancer in men between the ages of 15 and 35. But fortunately for us, our dangly bits are, well, dangly and easily accessible. Besides, we enjoy playing around with them anyway, so why not give them a quick check the next time you're down there clearing out the undergrowth? The Testicular Cancer Society has partnered with Manscaped to create a special page giving you all of the various resources you might need to check yourself for testicular cancer, which is a very, very important thing to do. They will also be giving you, of course, a bit of a discount code. I'll have it available on screen right now, ARCH20, for 20% off your order of any Manscaped articles, plus free shipping. That way you can get all of the various equipment needed to take the goodest, bestest care of your balls, whilst also making sure that they're not going to be a danger to your health. Testicular cancer may be common, but like with all forms of cancer, if you can find it early, your odds of beating the bastard will increase drastically. So do make sure to check yourself for cancer and to check Manscaped's page with links in the description below. Now then, the Leagues of Votann. The long-awaited return of the squats. Or, well, kinda yes, maybe in a way. I can't lie, the first models and artworks we've seen so far look decidedly boring to me, honestly. Now, we're gonna get more into the aesthetics a bit later, because I want to start by talking about the thing I actually do like, which is the Votanns themselves, but the thing is, the squats were a very crazy, over-the-top faction. They had trikes with heavy weaponry mounted on the back. They had battle blimps. They were fighting hordes of orcs wearing padded cloth and wielding axes. They were really cool and absurdly insane as well. I really like them, and I think it's a real missed opportunity to not try and translate some of that crazy nonsense into modern day 40k. But Again, we'll get back to the aesthetics a bit later, because I want to start with the positive, the Votanns, because I really do like the idea of the Votanns. I think that the GW lads have stumbled across a bit of a genius idea here that allows them to maintain a lot of the cool aesthetics and history of the dwarves whilst modernizing it into the 41st millennium and still having it make sense. So, what are the Votanns? Well, they are the so-called Ancestor cores, supercomputers, and each and every single league has a Votann at the core of their hierarchy. This supercomputer contains the accumulated knowledge of the league and presumably larger parts of squats, I guess, civilization's knowledge as a whole. It also contains a whole bunch of ancient human knowledge, including STC patterns. In fact, the whole Ancestor core thing sounds an awful lot like the original supercomputers that traveled with the very first human settlers out into space. You know, the ones where they loaded up every single STC onto so as to make sure that the new colonies would thrive no matter what the environment, no matter what the local resources, etc., etc. The Ancestor cores sound a lot like that, albeit presumably a lesser version, since they do not contain all of the STCs, nor do they contain that vast collection of human knowledge that those original machines would have had. And we know this because, well, the League aren't time traveling. They aren't creating weapons that fire black holes, etc. Or at least, not as so far as we know right now, because that was what humanity used to be able to do. And at least judging from the admittedly highly limited artwork we've been given so far, while squat technology does seem to be superior to that of the general Imperium, it doesn't seem crazily superior. We're not even talking Tau levels here. We are simply talking about a greater distribution of, on average, slightly higher tech than the Imperium. Like, there's a lot of what appears to be basically powered armor, for example. So the Ancestor cores undoubtedly contain vast treasure troves of information, but they're not anywhere near the original supercomputers. Furthermore, these Ancestor cores, which, again, you've probably picked up on the Ancestor part, that's what I really love, because it's a very nice, subtle little touch. Okay, so this is a supercomputer that contains all of the knowledge of your preceding generations that is worshipped and held in incredibly high regard by the squats. Well, it's Ancestor worship. It really is a pretty brilliant little idea to maintaining that very ancient and seemingly outdated concept of worshipping one's ancestors by making your ancestors a tremendously huge computer. Again, credit where credit is due. I really love that idea, but it does come with some lore problems and caveats here and there. It is mentioned that the Ancestor cores can be interacted with. You can presumably type in commands or maybe even speak to them and they'll be able to pick up your voice, and you can ask them questions and ask for resolutions to queries, etc. Going like, okay, we're on a planet, these are the resources we have available to us, how do we make a tank? A la the idea of the original STC blueprints, for example. Alright, the Ancestor core would in the past then just search through his library and go, oh, here you go, here's the STC for making a tank using rubber and duck anuses, God only knows. But apparently, these Ancestor cores are now beginning to slow down, which makes a lot of sense. No matter how complicated or advanced the computer is, it's going to be experiencing slowdown over time, particularly if you keep cramming more and more pointless nonsense onto its hard drive. This in return means that the Ancestor cores are becoming less and less effective. They take longer and longer to answer questions, they take longer and longer to come up with solutions, and There's also a mention that they've developed personalities, which... GW, the whole call inferior thing is already you forgetting that you have stated very clearly that in 40k all AI will eventually turn genocidal, because that is simply the nature of AI in the 41st millennium, and now you're introducing an entire faction that revolves around the application of basically AIs? And I've got another gripe with this as well. So, you've got here a supercomputer that's slowing down. Alright, ask the supercomputer how to stop it from slowing down. What? Is there no defragmentation tool? Is there no user manual? This would be a pretty obvious question and a pretty simple way to fix it. Like, hey, Ancestor Core, how do I make you not run like garbage? Beep, boop, beep. Delete silly porn folders, please. I suppose you could argue that over the years, they uploaded all of their ancestors' history to the Ancestor Core, and this itself became the garbled information. You now have a billion, trillion, million, zillion, quillion files of the combined history of every single squat that has ever lived, chogging up every inch of that poor straining hard drive. And the squats, viewing this as essentially ancestor worship, could never bring themselves to deleting any of this data, because to them it would be like killing their ancestors. Like, all that remains of Thorgrim Orkbuggerer is this .jpeg and text file. I can't delete that, because if I do, then he'll finally be gone for good. You could argue that the squats basically see this as a form of immortality, and you know what? I'd buy that. Yet, at the same time, you could simply tell that to the Ancestor Core, go like, sorry, I can't delete that file. Is there any other way to speed you up? And it goes, beep, boop. Okay, then, give me a new hard drive. At which point you could ask it, all right, how does a hard drive work? And it has spit out the goddamn blueprints, because there is no way the blueprint of the computer that is meant to contain all of the knowledge relevant to the computer and its operators are not stored on the computer. I'm kind of annoyed about that. I guess you could argue that the squats never thought to ask that question, but at some point the squats wouldn't have been dumbass ancestor worshippers. At some point the squats would have been simple human colonists who would have viewed the ancestor cores as just a funky ass computer. Again, I suppose we could argue that this knowledge too has been completely lost to the ages, but there are dozens of these leagues, right? There are a lot of leagues. None of them wrote this down. Nobody put this in their ancestor.txt file. Oh, by the way, if computers start slowing down, ask it to build you a new hard drive. It's also a little bit too reminiscent of the God Emperor plotline as well. Well, it basically is the God Emperor plotline. You've got an ancient piece of machinery, the ancient piece of machinery is failing, and oh god, what will we do when the ancient piece of machinery fails? Except in this case, again, you could ask the ancient machinery for the instruction manual, but details. And following this line of logic as well, there's a very interesting mention in the lore blurb that we've currently got available that says that the League are making sure to keep their Votanns a secret from the more superstitious elements of the galaxy and the Imperium. Now, we'll return to their relationship with the Imperium in a little bit, but superstitious, that's an interesting word. Do the League not view their Votanns in a superstitious light? Because it kind of sounds like they do. In fact, it sounds like they obviously do. Because if the League has a better understanding of technology than the Mechanicum, then they would be able to understand that the Votanns are technology. They would be able to, well, repair them. They'd be able to figure out a solution to their current technological problems. or at the very least continuously try to research a solution. Or maybe they are simply slightly less superstitious than the Imperium, in that they understand how technology works on a larger scale, but still view their Votanns as de facto deities. There's another mention of this in the lore blurb as well, saying that these venerable cogitators are sacred to the kin as gods are to the more spiritual races, suggesting that the Votann may very well still be superstitious, yet their superstition simply revolves around a different thing. By the way, I do refuse to call them the kin, because that's a very dumb name for space dwarves. The clan would be better, but that does have some negative connotations, I do guess. Or the clans. There you go, that was a little bit better, and slightly less negative connotations. Anywho, returning to the point, I cannot help but feel the GW has written themselves into a bit of a circle here, where you're left asking the same question. Okay, the League has a better understanding of technology than humanity. Rightio, why aren't they fixing the machines? Well, because they're superstitious. But hold on, don't they have a better understanding of technology than humanity? Yes, they do. Then why aren't they fixing the machines? And so on and so on. Now again, obviously, the information we have available to us right now is very limited, so perhaps GW has a reasonable explanation for all of this, beyond simply saying that the League looks at the Votann and go, oh, no, that piece of machinery, that piece of machinery isn't a machine, that's an ancestor. Right. Somewhat arbitrary, but very well. Let us then move on to the Squat's relationship with humanity, with the Imperium, because as mentioned, they wish to keep the Votanns a secret from the more superstitious races. This includes humanity, and well, you can imagine what the Adeptus Mechanicus might do to the League if they knew that these super cogitators existed crammed full of STC technology. Mechanicus Explorator fleets have gone to war for a lot less than that. So there are very, very good reasons why the League would want to keep their secrets closely guarded. But they've also mentioned an uneasy alliance with the Imperium. Alliance with the Imperium. Not a part of the Imperium, not a imperial protectorate or imperial colonies or imperial settlements or imperial fleets, but they are separate from the Imperium entirely. They are allied with the Imperium in the same way that the Adeptus Mechanicus are, or at the very least something along the same lines. I am not particularly fond of this one because it places the League as a separate power structure, which means that they are an incredibly, unbelievably powerful force in the galaxy. For the Imperium to run into abhumans and ally with them, rather than demand they joined the Imperium, is unheard of, and it lessens the position of the Mechanicum as well. They used to be a very specific exception to the rule. They were an ally to the Imperium that nevertheless worked within the Imperium. It was a administrative distinction without a true difference, really. And if leagues are on the level of the Adeptus Mechanicus, then Christ, we have ourselves a brand new power balance in the galaxy, don't we? What's interesting as well is that they've been described as spacefarers. Alright, and all of their art too seems to be on spaceships. Do they not operate colonies? You would think they would have to for, basic necessities like food and water, unless they have some kind of enormous generation ship kind of thing, an Eldar craft world style thing, basically. Or maybe they have tons of mining colonies scattered all throughout the galaxy with the equipment needed to grow food there. Or maybe they are both parts. Maybe they hail from a central planet, but they primarily stay on spaceships traveling throughout the galaxy to look for resources. A little bit too close to the Adeptus Mechanicus Explorator fleet at that point. I feel like the League is taking a bit too much inspiration from other 40k factions, and perhaps not enough inspiration from Warhammer Fantasy, ironically enough. This speculation obviously comes with the usual disclaimer that it's all based on, like, 2 words in the currently available lore, which describes the new squats as doughty spacefarers. But let us move on from the fluff for a moment and return to the aesthetics, the look and the appeal of the new squat. This image is probably one of the most informative ones, straight up, since it gives us a scene of what appears to be some sort of military briefing. You've got a hologram there on the side, which is apparently being projected from the wall, I'd guess, as there's a little light you can see over there to the right. The hologram itself also tells us something about the technological level of the Leagues. Now, the Imperium has holographic technology as well, but it is usually described as fuzzy and or unclear, whereas this is pretty damn crystal, although there is... I don't know if it's interference or the haziness or if it's simply showing some sort of space nebula or something, but you can see a lot of red lines there, smudgy red lines, which maybe they're simply for aesthetic purposes, or it might indicate that the holographic technology is far from perfect. Nevertheless, it looks to be Imperial or slightly above standard when it comes to the holographic tech. In the center of the room, we can see what is presumably a warlord of some sort, wearing slightly more ornate gear than the soldiers around the room. At first, I thought it was maybe a human, actually, visiting the League, because his proportions seem really, really wrong. Like, he looks human proportioned. He has long legs in comparison to his body. He's a little rotund and compact, but not really dwarfish at all, really. But at the same time, he's wearing robes with what I would presume to be squattish iconography, squattish decorations. His armor, too, seems to be of squat design, so it seems unlikely that he's a visiting inquisitor or something. He is very clearly taller than the other squats around the room, but I don't know if that's perspective. Honestly, I'm having a hard time telling. I would say that he's probably a squat, just judging by his visual appearance, even though his proportions seem really quite badly off. Then, off to the rear, you see a series of backlit characters sitting inside of alcoves, inside of what I at first thought might be some sort of viewing gallery. Perhaps these are honored elders attending a military briefing, maybe. But looking at them, I'm also kind of wondering if they might not be simple statues, made to resemble honored ancestors that have become one with the Votann, as what they're sitting in as well is connected to a great deal of wires and cables and tubes. Perhaps that is the Votann. Perhaps they are decorating its outer shell with their own iconography. You can see some dwarven iconography between the two guards as well. And maybe they have simply decided to intern either the preserved bodies of honored ancestors in stasis fields, or simply just having made stone statues of them. Or maybe they are in stasis fields but not dead yet, and are brought back to life for limited periods of time when their ancient knowledge is required. That would actually be pretty damn cool, but I feel like it would clash with the ancestral worship a bit as well. You know, to keep Grandpa on a jar, which you pop open whenever you need some ancient wisdom. I'm probably leaning towards the interpretation that it's some sort of viewing gallery, however, because the Warlord is clearly pointing at something, he's talking, he's explaining something, and I doubt he's explaining it to the 3 guards around the room. That'd be weird. So, Bob, this is where I'll be launching my offensive, but you wouldn't care about that. You're literally here to guard this room, so ignore me. I'm just, thinking out loud. It's not impossible, but it would be silly. And speaking of silly, the guards. I hate the looks of the guards. I really, genuinely despise the looks of the guards because, have a look at them. They are StarCraft Marines. Straight up. Shoulder pads, StarCraft. The helmet area, StarCraft. The weapon, StarCraft. The chest piece, StarCraft. They are StarCraft Marines, except they're currently red. The only real difference I can see is, you can see the one on the slightly more right, close to the Warlord. He has a helmet, at least, that doesn't look like the StarCraft helmet. It looks like a Fallout helmet instead. But man, I hate these armored warriors. They are straight up StarCraft Marines. Man, I remember when StarCraft was ripping off 40k, but this is the other way around, and painfully blatant as well, it seems. I am not happy with that armor design at all. It is thoroughly uninspired, and furthermore, it's completely undwarven. You can see this on the Warlord as well. There's nothing that says dwarfish on that armor, which is why I'm still not entirely sure whether or not it is a squat or a human. Because beyond the occasional runic-looking iconography, there's nothing particularly dwarfish about it at all. He doesn't even have the toe boots or anything. Everything else is just rounded, flat, boring power armor with a picture drawn here and there on the shoulder guards. You can see this problem as well on one of the other pieces of art we've got. This guy right here is not one of the elite soldiers in the previous picture. He's probably more of a regular frontline grunt, although spec'd up for melee with what looks like a power fist, a very Imperial designed power fist, and a plasma pistol, which also looks very straight up Imperial. It's not unique at all. Both of his weapons would be entirely at home on any Space Marine or any Imperial Guard model, which seems like a massively missed opportunity. You can also see that his shape here is far more squattish compared to the Warlord, so again, I'm not sure how much of this is perspective and how much of this is weird inconsistencies, or the Warlord might be an Inquisitor or something, just happens to be wearing squat armor. Yeah. But to return to the idea of dwarfishness, if his legs were longer, if he wasn't obviously short and stout-legged, this would just look like a human with a beard and a mohawk, as there are practically no other truly distinguishing features. Now granted, his armor doesn't look like any Imperial armor we've seen before, it doesn't look like Space Marine armor, but merely the fact that it doesn't outright resemble other armor doesn't mean that it looks unique or interesting. For all I would have known, this would simply have been some sort of void suit used by space travelers, and I do believe that is a little bit of the point as well with the design of the armor, but man, it is such a missed opportunity. The only concession to the idea of dwarfish aesthetic here is the lamp on the front, which would be very, very useful if you're operating in or around a spaceship. Having a source of light immediately on your chest would be very useful. And it also harkens a little bit back to the whole idea of a mining folk, But again, besides that, there's nothing. There's no iconography, there's no real runes, there's no ancestor markings or dwarven insignia. His weapons don't look interesting at all. His armor itself too is... it's that goddamn problem with modern day 40k, where everything has to be rounded, everything has to be Primaris-ified, everything has to be tactical looking. Nothing can just be bulky and brutish anymore, which annoys me as well. And this isn't just the art either, we've got the actual model of this as well right here. This is clearly the same kind of trooper. Now he has one other kind of distinguishing feature, and that's the toe boots. Alright, that's a little bit of more dwarfism, it's a little bit of additional detail added to his appearance, but that's also where the good news stops, as his weapon as well, it just looks kind of Imperial. You've got a very clearly Imperial standard fuel cell there as the magazine. The weapon itself looks like some sort of multi-melter plasma gun hybrid thing. It looks more different than the plasma pistol, I'll give it that, but at the same time, I wouldn't look at that and go, oh, that's a Space Dwarf weapon. And granted, a lot of the previous squats too just used other forms of Imperial weaponry, but, well, that was a product that was designed decades ago by a company not even a fraction of the size of GW today. I'd expect more of GW today, straight up. Even more so as they have demonstrated already that they can make squat-ish looking squats. You remember the Necromunda models? I'll give you a couple of examples here. These look like Space Dwarfs. Do you see the difference? I'll put them up side by side. The difference is stunningly immediate and obvious. On the one side, you've got Space Dwarves. On the other, you've got a weird-looking human with stunty legs. Like, look at the Necromunda ones. Look at the Slayer style kind of guy. Now, granted, the whole orange mohawk would not make a whole lot of sense in 40k unless they're going to do a Slayer cult, but look at his armor. Like, it's wide, it's rotund, it's bulky, it's got lots of details on it. He's got mismatching knee pads. He's reinforced his boots with little kickers there. He's got different shoulder pads. One's in leather, one's a simple piece of studded metal. He's got a gorget. He's covered in ammunition. He's got a mechanical arm. He's got a wrench as a melee weapon and a giant-ass breech-loaded super pistol shotgun-y thing. That is eminently dwarfish. The other guy too. He's carrying an old pattern-style bolter. Okay, a fairly standard Imperial weapon, yet it is blockier, it is bulkier, it is older, and it's also got a little bit of that dwarven insignia on it there, making it fit in far better with the model. And you've got here too a more Imperial style thing, because he's wearing what looks kinda like more of a Acadian style visored helmet with standardized shoulder guards. He's got standardized boots. He's less mismatched than the previous one, and yet he still gives up a decidedly dwarven aesthetic. He's got tons of iconography, and he's wearing padded cloth armor. He's got a braided beard. He's got beard decoration. He's covered with little carry containers. And his other weapon too looks like a giant-ass hammer. Like, that is a much more dwarven weapon immediately. I don't understand how they went from these very clearly squat and Warhammer Dwarf-inspired characters to the decidedly boring, sterile, and uninspired design of the Leagues of Votann. I mean, am I the only one who thinks this is a massive downgrade? Am I missing something, perhaps? At least they're not blatant StarCraft rip-offs, I guess, but even then. Incidentally as well, GW, you really should fire the guy who keeps ripping off StarCraft, because you've done this earlier too. Remember the dumbass bunker thing? Yeah, seriously. You were supposed to be better than this, GW. Blizzard rips off you, not the other way around. Now, let's get to some conclusions about all of this, shall we? Bringing it all together. The lore, from what little we know of it, I quite like. The Votanns do have some rather glaring issues, but I'm hoping that most of those will be resolved in further lore updates, explanations for why they're slowing down, why they can't be fixed, how the dwarves interact with them, etc., etc. I would also like to see more on their spacefaringness, like how do they supply themselves, how do they stay fed, are their ships like massive generation ships, do they have bases, etc. Because already the minor aesthetic works fairly well with the idea of enormous space Hulk-like constructs, like these titanic colony ships, or maybe even like full-on asteroids with engines mounted on them, where large parts of it have long been forgotten, and now teams of squats have to delve into the dark and fight, I don't know, goblins that have snuck aboard somehow? Unlikely, sure, but it would certainly fit the dwarven aesthetic quite a bit. I feel like if they haven't quite nailed it, they're certainly well on the way to capturing a good variant of the squats in the lore. Design-wise, however, I think they couldn't be further from the goal if they tried. And a lot of the problem here is that, this is my conspiracy theory time, but I suspect that the GW staff, when they sat down to create the Leagues of Votann, they thought to themselves, alright, what are we going to create? We're going to create space dwarves. Yeah, it'll be awesome. And then somebody raised their hand and went, hold on, aren't we already making space dwarves, in Age of Sigmar? Because they are. Here, let me show you some Age of Sigmar units. Would you have any problems whatsoever putting these in a 40k game and going, counter squats? Because I wouldn't. These are space dwarves. In fact, they've even got some of the squats units, like the over-the-top, crazy-ass looking gyrocopter thingy. Like, these are the space dwarves right here. Which presents a bit of a problem, doesn't it? GW can't just go like, oh yes, those Age of Sigmar models, they work in 40k now. Because it'd be really, really dumb and incredibly gosh darn lazy. Yet at the same time, these are the squats. These models are the space dwarves. There's no question about it. So if the Leagues of Votann can't look like the Age of Sigmar space dwarves, but still need to be space dwarves, what do? Apparently the answer is make them painfully bland, boring, and uninteresting. Which isn't a very good answer. Oh, and rip off StarCraft a little bit here and there, I do suppose. But the problem is, what are they going to do about this? They've already made the squats. They've already created the space dwarves, but with slightly more rustic and archaic looking, but very unique weaponry. So what are they actually going to do here? This is one of the problems as well, because with the lore, I keep making the argument, I keep adding in the caveat that a lot of it could be expanded upon, a lot of it could change, a lot of it could make a lot more sense once you know the full picture. But with the design that we're seeing right now, and we've seen quite a lot of the design, where are they gonna go from here? Like, what is the option? Are the League suddenly going to have very different looking weaponry? Are they suddenly going to have really different armor from the two types we've seen? If so, why? What would be the explanation for a massive divergence in aesthetics within the same faction, to the point of their armor and their weapons looking suddenly drastically different? Not to mention, if you've got one faction that looks good and another faction that looks rounded and boring, I mean, they literally painted them grey as if to further enhance the lack of personality. Then why would anyone ever pick up the boring ones? It feels a lot like Games Workshop is having a very hard time with originality as of late. Like, they are really struggling to understand the spirit of their setting, the feel of it, the idea of it, and the reality of it. We can see this in the Return of the Old World as well, with Kislev, for example. Kislev used to be a pretty damn cool faction, this mix of a little bit of Mongolian, a little bit of Muscovite Russia, a little bit of Poland. It was very unique looking, and it had a very distinct and clear flavor. And yet now, in the newest variant, it's just ice weapons, ice spears, ice magic, ice troops, ice and bears. Kislev is so much more than just goddamn ice and bears. Granted, it's a cooler aesthetic than grey, tiny people in space, but it is nevertheless a fundamentally, creatively bankrupt aesthetic. And never say never, perhaps they'll find some way to refine it, fix it up, add on it, iterate on it to make them look properly, well, different, but if the key issue here really is a simple lack of creativity, that is not something you're gonna be fixing overnight. So, all in all, whilst I do like the lore and the idea and the basic feel of the squats, I hate their appearance, and I don't think that it's a problem that GW is going to be able to fix, at the very least not in the short term, particularly as well as with the release of these images, they've already pretty much set the appearance of the League of Votann in stone. Like, these are their design decisions, and suddenly radically changing that is quite unlikely. So when people ask me if I am excited for the squats, my answer have been and will still remain, I'll wait to get excited until I see something I actually like. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again next week. Until then, have a good day.